Hey everybody, I'm Anna McEwen. And now for Bob Switzer with the epic narrative.
Well, there we go. We are on our way. Man, oh man, it's just awesome. The layers of stuff that goes on and the relational connections that go on in these epic narratives that we have are so much fun because you could actually spend so much more time on them. And you say, Bob, no, don't spend any more time. I listen to you every week and they are so long already. I know. I try not to make them too long this year compared to last year, right? I mean, if you listen to David, you know that there were times I often went more than an hour. And here I'm really trying to keep it down to 40 to 50 minutes, but generally around 40 minutes, plus my some afterthoughts, some Bob thoughts after each one, just because we got plenty of time to go along. And you know what? I don't want to do. I want to lay out opportunities for you to interact with stories with curiosity that maybe spark an opportunity for you to do a little bit more research, to do a little bit of digging, without turning every story in the Bible into a manipulative, behavioral, modificational opportunity, which is what unfortunately what a lot of pastors do, right? They take this, they find what they're looking for. It's like, yes, now I can tell people how to behave. And I hope you don't feel that way when you listen to me. That is the Bob Switzer on the Epic Narrative. Thanks so much for coming today, everybody. Here we go. Genesis 29. Verse uno. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. That would be where he was headed. Now he continued on the journey. What does that mean? It's time. It's time. It's one of those time verses. It's awesome. You know, he's alone, maybe he's in a group periodically. As he's walking, he had an amazing encounter with the Lord. And it wasn't like the Lord was a brand new thought for him, right? It was part of his culture, part of his family, part of the testimonies, the stories, the rescues, the survival, the favor, all that stuff. God got credit for. So there was, it was not a, it wasn't a foreign thought to be interacting with the Lord. And so along the way, he's got time to interact with God. He's got time to interact with himself. He's thinking about his family. I'm sure he kind of wondered, like if his brother had already calmed down, maybe he could go home again. I'm sure he's guessing, maybe I'll be gone for a month, maybe two. I mean, I've never met these people, but again, culturally, hospitality was huge. Like you had to show hospitality, especially to a relative. But because of the harshness of the land, even strangers were given hospitality because it was the honorable thing to do. It didn't matter whether you liked them or if they came from a clan that you didn't agree with. They needed shelter at night. They needed food, and you provided it. It was just a general accepted practice. So he's going along to a place he's never been, but he knows there's people there. He's, I'm sure, starting to hope for the future. He has a great promise from the Lord that he just got in the last episode. And he's thinking, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. I'm going to go in, get a wife. I'm going to come home. I'm also thinking that he's remembering the testimonies of his father's, wife search. Remember Eliezer went, sat by a well, found the girl, got the girl, went home. Isaac fell in love with her first thing. Bada boom, bada bing. Day was over. So, well, not quite the day. I know it wasn't a day long, but it was a pretty quick turnaround. And I have a feeling he's very hopeful that will help him for him. So in verse 2, chapter 29, verse 2, there he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered at that well, and the stone over the mouth of the well was very large. When the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the mouth of the well and would water the sheep, and then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" And they were like, "We're from Haran." He said, "Wow, awesome." Okay, that's not, anyways, that was my words. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" Yes, we know him. Jacob said, well, is he well? In other words, is he alive? Does he exist? What's going on with him? And they're like, yeah, he's doing great. Here comes his daughter, Rachel, with the sheep. Look, he said, the sun is still high. It's not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to the pasture. We can't, they replied, until all the flocks are gathered at the stone, gathered, and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep. So while he's still talking to them, Rachel comes up with the father's sheep, and she was the shepherd. Now, this stone thing was evidently very heavy. And so you would gather the sheep and water them, but generally you did that toward the end of the day. Because during the day you would take them out into the fields and you find them shade, and they would eat and they would stay in the shade and stay cool, and then you would bring them in. But because of the weight of the stone, they had to wait for everybody to get together, and then they would all have to move the stone, and then they would all water their sheep, and then they all had to stay until everybody was watered, and then they all had to move the stone back. So it was a cumbersome, inefficient, and it was just logistically, it wasn't a good deal especially for sheep herders, right? And of course, Jacob knows this because they have lots of sheep back at their back at their tents. So he knows how to raise sheep. He knows what's proper, what's a good rhythm for their day. So he calls him out on it. I mean, Rachel's on her way. He hears about that, right? He hears that Nahor's doing great, that and obviously he has a daughter. So he sees this well. He's in the area of his relatives, which is why he asked about Nahor to begin with. He just kind of it's not a GPS system. It's a relational system. So you kind of go to the general area of what you're looking for. You start asking questions and people kind of point you in the direction, or they tell you, we've never heard of them, keep walking. And that happened a lot. I often think of that when I read like history and you got the Revolutionary War or the Civil War or whatever. And people are like, so we all went down to this area of the country. And I think, how did they find it? Like, where? Well, we took the trail. What trail? Like, you just got to know these things. And if you didn't know, you asked, and people would send you down these roads. Like it's fascinating to me how people traveled in these days without GPS, without a map, without a phone. Well, they might have had maps. I shouldn't say they didn't have maps. Of course, they could have had maps. Anyways, so he goes to the well. Now, wells represent a lot of things. They, obviously places of life. If you see a well, you can hang out there. You're going to get water. You're probably going to find people. You're probably going to get some food. So not only are you going to get some basic information from the shepherds, because eventually the shepherds are going to show up, but you're going to get some nourishment. You're going to get some hospitality. You're going to figure out what's going on. So you go to a well. There he was. He went to where he needed to go. He's probably a little excited because, he knows the testimony of his father. He knows that his father's servant met the wife at a well. So it's a good rhythm. It's a good place to go. I'm sure he's very hopeful, very excited. So Rachel shows up. So she's a shepherd. And so I'm guessing this is where you start to, I don't know. For me, it gets kind of crazy. Okay, so she's probably 12 or 13. She wouldn't have been a shepherd unless she was considered a woman, and she wouldn't be a woman unless she had gone through puberty. So to be a shepherd, she had to probably be about 12 years old. Now, genetically speaking, puberty tended to hit earlier in those days because of the culture and expectations of the world. People tended to mature more quickly. It's really interesting, but it was the Western culture that developed the whole idea of a teenager, where you just kind of learned and experience and get educated before you actually do anything. I mean, I know a lot of teenagers do a lot of things and they work hard and stuff, and I'm not belittling that, but the concept of being a teenager was something that kind of got invented much later in life. Teenagers were considered hard work, like they were just workers. It's why so many families would have so many children, is because their concept was, well, in 10 or 11 years, they're working the farm. So let's have a bunch. Then we don't have to hire anybody. We get all this free labor. So Jacob goes to the well. They tell him Rachel's on the way. So while he's talking to them, Rachel came up with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. Verse 10, when Jacob saw Rachel's daughter, Rachel and her uncle. Oh, sorry. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle. Bob, read the words. They're right there in front of you. And Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Now, remember, this is like one of those logistical things. Remember what we just read. All the shepherds had to wait for all the shepherds before they could move the stone so that they could water their sheep. This is a daily routine. Jacob sees Rachel. He sees the sheep. He sees that she needs to water the sheep. And he goes over and moves the stone. This is kind of either one of those super adrenaline rushes or it's a miracle. She's alone. She has a small flock. She's a hard worker. He steps right in. He's clearly very excited to see her, right? And not only that, he waters the sheep. Like, it's not even like he moves the stone and then steps back and watches her do her work. He takes care of her. Now she's like 12 years old. And I know this is where it gets weird for me. He's like 77. Then what? Now, I know they lived a lot longer. 77 is literally midlife. Maybe not even midlife yet. He's not, he obviously hasn't been married before, but still, this is hard for my Western mind to wrap around. So he sees her, he waters her, he kisses her, which, like again, he's just crying. He's kissing her probably on both cheeks and hugging her. And he's like, he tells Rachel that he is a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran to tell her father. So whatever is exchanged here, he basically is saying, I came here looking for relatives. I came here looking for a wife, and there you are. This is amazing. So she runs and tells her dad, right? And as soon as Laban hears the news, Jacob, son of Isaac, son of his sister, he runs to meet him. He embraces him, he kisses him, he brings him into his home, and there Jacob told him all the things that he had gone through, all the stories of home, all the stories of his brother, of how his mom was doing. Like, this is a long night. And Laban says to him, you are my own flesh and blood, after Jacob had stayed with him a whole month. So when we read this verse 13, where it says he embraced him and kissed him and brought him in his home, and there Jacob told him all things, that's how long of a day it was. It was a month-long day. Now, this is amazing, right? Jacob is excited because this is very much, in his mind, very similar to his mother's story. But he doesn't come with resources. I think Laban hurried out because Laban's thinking, holy cow, he's probably got 20 camels to bring in. He's probably got so much stuff piled on those things. I need to bring them all back. I need to make sure everybody knows that I am here for him, that this whole family connection is something I don't want anyone else interrupting. I bet you there's people already trying to talk him out of some of the wealth he brought. And I have a feeling when Laban shows up, he expects great wealth, right? But he's disappointed. He's looking at it going, wait, I kind of picture him hugging Jacob, kissing Jacob, saying, you are my brother, my son, whatever. Those general family terms, hugging on him, and he's kind of looking over his shoulder, and he's like, well, where's your supplies? It's just me. I just walked here alone. Oh, all right. Well, why don't you come stay with me? So they're hanging out for a month. And Laban can't quite figure out what's going on. Because, man, he talks about all the wealth. He talks about all the things that they've done, all the servants they have, and the army army standing security they have, and the shepherds that they have, and the market that they work in, and the merchants they have interactions with. All these connections that for Laban is all about money. I mean, I think he's probably still upset that his dad didn't hang on to Rebecca longer and force Isaac to come out to the family compound with more wealth, with 10 more camels. So he's wondering if, is this guy telling the truth or is he not? And so Laban says to him, just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages will be. So evidently within that month, Jacob started to just do some general labor and work for Laban. He has a much higher grade of knowledge and experience within the business world and within the raising of herds that he just naturally steps into a role of management and supervising. And after a month, Laban's looking around going, well, listen, you want to get paid for this? And Laban had 2 daughters. The older one was Leah. The name of the younger one was Rachel. And Leah had weak eyes, and Rachel was lovely and beautiful. And Jacob was in love with Rachel, and he said, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Laban says, well, it's better for me to give her to you than some other man, so stay here. And then the next verse, right? Jacob worked 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because he loved her. Now that's a beautiful verse, right? Love is a very powerful, amazing, crazy thing, right? That you can work 7 years and it just seems like nothing. He's 77 years old when he starts this whole thing. She's 12. So it's, or whatever. She's going to be like 20 when they get married. So all this makes sense. And he like every day he sees her. She's during this 7 years, as the promise is made, like she gets into like training. People know, okay, she's promised to Jacob. Jacob is getting prominence within the family. He's clearly making good decisions. The sheep are multiplying. The goats are multiplying. There's what we would call favor or blessing on his and on all of his decisions. Laban's getting wealthier, but Laban is a surly dude. He's not ever really happy with anything. He's making sure people know that well, things could be better, and Jacob's not that great of a guy. But I think in a lot of ways, Laban's disappointed because I honestly can't imagine that Jacob didn't occasionally, or at least initially, reach back out to the family to see if he could get some compensation, get what do I want to say, a dowry. Did he send a message back to his mom, hey, I've made arrangements to marry one of Laban's daughters, but it'd be really great if I could get a dowry? Or did he decide based on the interaction that he had with God that he's not going to access the family wealth, and he's going to work for or do the culturally acceptable thing and not just pay for a wife but wait for her? Now a lot, these options, you could have both. Like maybe he reached out to his family, and Esau is what? He's running the family. All the wealth is in Esau's hands at this point. Jacob doesn't have any say in what's going on. Isaac's overseeing things. I know he can't see things, but he's seeing, he's helping Esau. And I have a feeling that Rebecca's also being helpful. Everything's running fine, but somebody has to make a decision. Do we send money to Jacob? And the decision was no, maybe. I don't know. There's no record, but in my head, it's hard for me to imagine that a businessman like Jacob didn't reach back out to his family. So in that, he's there. In a month, he's already starting to make a difference. Laban doesn't want Jacob to leave. So he's like, well, what do you want? You want to work for me? Let me pay you. Jacob's like, well, you take care of me, great, but I'll tell you what, I really need a wife, want a wife, and your daughter Rachel, the younger one, she's very beautiful. And the Bible makes note of that. Like in essence, God agrees with him. She is beautiful. Now, when it says that Leah had weak eyes, people aren't sure what that means, and it can go lots of ways. It can mean that she doesn't see well, or it could mean that she had what was considered what do they call them? Like doe eyes. Her eyes were doe eyes. They just were considered not as attractive. Okay, so if her eyes weren't her best feature, or this is the other crazy thing, that language can also mean that her eyes were her only best feature, that her eyes were dominate. And when you looked at her, you're captivated by her eyes. The rest of her, like well, not that they saw them in anything, but that would be considered immodest. But if you looked at her, you didn't look at her and think, "Wow, she's a really good-looking woman." You would walk away going, "Man, did you see her eyes? They were stunning." Her eyes were at least the part that everybody talked about, whether they were not considered attractive or considered her only attractive point. Then you have Rachel, who was attractive all the way through, and everybody knew it. And now she's promised to her, to Jacob, who is 77 years old and working for Laban. So Jacob chooses work over going back to the family, right? Now, I have a feeling that the way that this is phrased, again, when Laban responds, I'll work 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. He's like, it's better for me to give her to you than some other man, so stay here with me. It's a very condescending phrase, and basically he's saying, well, all right, fine. I mean, you're a relative, and you keep telling me you have money, but I don't see any. So fine, if nothing else, at least she stays in the family, and I'll have access to her. He also may be thinking, this man is wealthy, and I might as well give him one of my daughters, because at least then I'll have some bloodline connection to this wealth. Laban, as we know, as we continue, this story, if you've spent any time in this story on your own, you know that Laban is a very greedy, selfish, deceitful man. And a lot of people compare him to Jacob because Jacob, obviously deceived his brother out of the blessing, and he was part of that plan. And he also begged and tricked, I guess you say, I don't know, he bargained for the birthright, and as far as Esau is concerned, he stole it. So there's a correlation here where some people are like, you reap what you sow. You get what you get what you are. Some people think that God set this up, right? God's like, fine, I need to teach my new leader of the family how to not be deceitful. So he needs to experience the kind of deceit and greed that he exuded on his brother Esau, rather than trusting me. I don't know. Like, all of those things can be drawn out of this if you want to. But for me, the general, in the epic narrative, I just see a guy who is doesn't want access to his family riches. He is in love, as weird as that sounds to be for me to be at 77. He's in love with a 12 or 13-year-old girl, and he's willing to work 7 years to wait until she's 20 to marry her. So he goes the 7 years. I mean, 7 years. She's training to be a wife. He's working the fields, and there's lots of benefits. Laban's getting incredibly wealthy, more and more influential in the area. He's benefiting from Jacob's presence, and he's not an idiot. He does understand that, but he also wants to keep Jacob down. He wants to keep Jacob from getting to too much of a threat. That's what I would say. People that are arrogant and greedy and selfish, right? Dictatorial in the way that they manage people. They look for threats all the time because they don't want to lose the power. They don't want to share the power. They don't want to lose the power. So it's very hard for them when somebody comes in and is actually amazing at what they do. That mindset says, well, I need to keep them down. I need to make sure that they don't get access to this part, right? They need to know that they're not in charge. And I think Laban constantly was reminding Jacob, you're not in charge. Just remember, you're not in charge. Just remember, these are my flocks. Just remember, I'm in charge. And Jacob's like, fine. Like for him, he wasn't there for the flocks. He wasn't there for taking over the family. He was there for Rachel. And it says the 7 years seemed like a day. He got into a rhythm and he worked the fields or walked the fields. He worked with people. Whatever he did every day, it was easy for him because he knew he was getting Rachel. And, over those years, he watched her probably get a little taller, her hair to get a little darker, her eyes to become more beautiful. I see that. I work with students as a coach, and sometimes we're off for the summer. Even good grief, sometimes we're off for a month in between seasons, and they come back like a guy will come back or a girl will come back, and you think, whoa, 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 like they've got to be like 4 inches taller. It's crazy. They look so different. Or their hair is grown, or sometimes for the girls it's they've curled it or they've dyed it. It's just fascinating to me how quickly people will adjust. And Rachel's going through that time, and she's growing through her quote teenage years. And every time he sees these changes in her, he falls more in love with her. He sees that she is more and more beautiful, and he cannot wait for the day that they get married. So that day arrives. Jacob says Jacob served 7 years, but they seemed like only a few days because he loved her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My time is complete. I want to make love to her. That's subtle. That was subtle. Yeah, I need to make a family. I need to start the family. My role, my promise, my destiny, my what God has called me to do is to be continue being the father of nations from Abraham. And I cannot let my brother steal that promise back just because he's the only one with wives and children. So he's very excited as the day was getting close. I totally get that. I do. I mean, I don't get the age difference because culturally that's really hard for me to wrap my head around, but I get the emotion that he's feeling. That makes perfect sense. Things are going along and you're within a year, you start to mark the calendar. At least I would. Good grief, we did it in school. I went to a boarding high school. I went to a boarding school for high school. I stayed there. And there were different ways that people would mark the days to the next vacation. The next day we all got to fly home. And then there were the seniors would often, not all of them, but many of them would have like calendars that they would mark, or they would, have, I knew one guy that put up squares of toilet paper. Like he counted them all out and he put that roll up on the wall, and every day he would just take one square off until, obviously when they graduated, there was no squares left. So I kind of pictured Jacob doing stuff like that, or at least keeping note of that. And he knew when that 7 years was up, and he walked right in. He's like, hey, the contract's over. I want my wife. I got to start a family. I have to start a family. Now, I would imagine as times were getting closer, and again, it's my imagination, which is in the Western culture of flirtation, but I would picture that he can't help himself, but periodically he tells her, his time is getting close in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Rachel. 2 weeks, Rachel. And she's excited. She's happy to be doing this. She's probably at this point serving him the meals, a part of the team that does that for the men of the house. And he makes comments. She sits by him. They talk. They go for walks after work. Like there's stuff that's going on here that we don't necessarily see. We just which it's just kind of covered under that concept of he loved her. He's excited for her. He cannot wait to have a family with her. He's watched her training. He knows her character. He's like, he's excited. Everything about this is go, go, go. So Laban brought together all the people of the place, in other words, the whole village. He puts together this whole feast. He knew that this was coming. He was probably trying to avoid it, but he's going to do the right thing. But at some level, he's also thinking, how do I keep Jacob around? Because if he leaves, everybody loves this guy. Even though people tolerated Laban, they didn't like him, and Laban probably knew that deep down. Like, people don't really like me, but people really like Jacob. So he gives, the wedding eve comes. He gives the younger servant to deceive, right? That's what he gave. And Laban gave his servant Zipporah to his daughter as her attendant. So she was going to take care of it. Now Zipporah was the younger of the servants. That was part of the deception of Laban. Then it says that when the morning came, Leah was there. Again, a shocking verse. So Jacob says to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Oh, it's our custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish the bridal week with this daughter, and I will give you the younger one, and then you can work another 7 years." This plan had been in place for a while. And Leah had to be somewhat aware of what was going on. Now, whether she was a year younger, 9 months younger than Rachel, or years younger than Rachel, we don't know. But let's just call it a year. So the younger servant goes in and starts to take care of the covering for Leah. Now, the reason why the younger servant was a deception is because the younger servant should have went with the younger daughter. So the fact that Zipporah was given to Leah helped deceive Jacob when the two of them walked off into the tent to prepare. Rachel just kept on walking, and Zipporah prepared Leah. Now, it wasn't unusual in those days, because I kept thinking, how in the world do you have relations on your wedding night and not know who it is? They would often, even to this day, there are some cultures that still do this. You basically cover the bride in a bag, except for one spot, which is left open for the one thing that needs to go there. And sometimes it's really fun to talk about this activity without using the words. So I hope you're not annoyed. And then when the thing was done, they would sleep there, and in the morning, you would uncover your bride. So when morning came, there was Leah. Now, I'm sure that Jacob is shocked, but it's not like he didn't know Leah or didn't have a relationship with her. I am sure that when he saw her, she knew that he was going to be upset. He was upset, but he also knew her. Like the conundrum of emotions that he had to go through. And he goes right out to Laban. He probably woke her up. And Laban just lays it right out there, right? He lays it right out there. He knows what the plan is. He's like, well, it's the rules. I'm obeying the rules. It's the culture that we live in. You didn't realize that? You didn't realize that? Oh, I'm sorry. Listen, this is what I'm thinking. Finish up the week with Leah. I'll give you Rachel right away. You can have her right away, but you need to work another 7 years. Now, I don't know how drunk, Jacob was that night, But I have a feeling he sobered up real quick in that morning, and he makes the agreement because he loves Rachel. Now, there's a lot of guys who would be like, especially in that culture, he's 70, well, no, he's 80 something years old at this point. He has it's not like this Leah girl was, a dog, and it's not like she wasn't young enough to produce children. So everything could have worked out fine, but he wanted Rachel. And there you go. I think this is another power thing that Laban did. He wanted to once again control Jacob. He wanted to make sure Jacob was in debt to him. Debt is an amazing, enslaving aspect to life. And we all know that if you live in our culture of today, debt is enslavement. And there are people that are so far in debt that everything they do in life is to basically try and keep from being overwhelmed by it. Much like the stereotypical master just beating on you all the time. Debt will beat on you. It weighs on you. And Jacob was under that with Laban, and Laban wants to keep that kind of power over him. He wants to make sure that Jacob continues to feel powerless to leave. And I don't know what Leah was going through all of this. She knew what was going on, right? Somewhere in the night, Rachel came in and Leah was exchanged. Somewhere in there, Rachel walked off into the tent and walked right through the tent. Maybe did she say hi to Leah? Like, have a nice night. I mean, what do you say? What is Leah going through? I literally can't imagine all those things, all the emotions, because I'm not a woman. I don't understand all the ramifications of, shall we say, the wedding night when you've not been with anyone ever, and you know that the person that's going to sleep with you is completely and utterly in love with someone else, and you've been exchanged for that someone else in order to trick this person and have your father, stay in power over him. And you're so tired of being with your father and living in that household that you're willing to do this. I don't know, willing is probably not the right word, but the control that Laban had over his daughters, like she was, I shouldn't say willing, you were powerless to stop the plan. Like that's what I picture in Leah's world. She was powerless. This in essence was, Jacob didn't rape her because he had no idea who she was. He thought that she was a willing participant because he thought it was Rachel. But she had to experience it at some level. It was at least an emotional rape through her father. I like the intensity of what went on in her mind had to be crazy. So Jacob, wakes up, uncovers her. She knew that was coming. He's shocked. He eventually jumps out of bed. She just probably, covers up. She's now the wife. Her servant Zipha knows about it. Zilpha knows about it. She just starts attending to her. I have a feeling she was in tears. Jacob goes out to see Laban. Laban's like, well, it's just the way things are. Work for me more. Now it says that Jacob did it. He finished a week with Leah. Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to the daughter Rachel to be the attendant, the older servant. Jacob made love with Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban 7 more years. We just covered a whole lot of time. We covered a whole lot of time and a whole lot of life. But I do find it interesting that he did love Leah. not as much as he loved Rachel, but he loved Leah. Now, I don't know because I would never dream of having a second wife. I don't know if you can love one more than the other, but he did. And I don't know what that's like to live in a culture, a small culture like that, a home culture, where you know you're second rate. You know you're the second tier. So in that, for 7 more years, it's very clear to everyone that Jacob favors Rachel, but he clearly still loves and hangs out with Leah. Why do we know this? Because the Lord saw what was going on, and what does he do? His goodness is there. I know it sounds like he did something special for her, but he's like, my goodness is here. And in his goodness, he enabled her to just, Leah became like a baby making machine. And then it in verse 31, it implies that somehow Rachel remained childless because of, that was God's judgment. No, it's just she was barren. So Leah just starts popping out babies, Reuben, and then Reuben, right? That's it. That the name of that is because the Lord has seen my misery. That's just such an encouraging name to have, right? The Lord has seen my misery. As the father of Reuben, wouldn't you love to have a child named the Lord has seen my misery? Oh my gosh, horrible. Anyways, she conceived again, gave birth to a son, and named that one Simon. She conceived again, gave birth to a son, and now she's got 3 sons. She named him Levi. She conceived again. She gave birth to a son. This time I will praise the Lord, and she named him Judah. And then she stopped having children. But in all of that, she always knew she was second rate. In those 7 years, in all those was it 4, right? 4 sons that she had. She knew she was a second tier wife. She knew that Rachel was favored. She knew that even though clearly she's sleeping with her husband, Rachel is also sleeping with her husband. I don't know what kind of dynamic that puts between 2 sisters. One who's having children and nursing and raising children and has multiple servants now helping her raise children, who they're all sons and they're all running around and they're toddlers and they're adorable. And I'm sure that Rachel, you can't help but love a little one, right? She's probably helping as well, holding the baby, giggling at the baby, helping raise them. There might be some conflict because, of course, Leah knows, hey, I'm the mom. I need to make that decision. You're not the mom. Just because Jacob loves you more doesn't mean you get to raise my children. I'm sure that there's all that kind of tension going on in the 7 years. And Jacob goes out, I'm guessing, every day to work the fields, to work in Laban's favor. And Laban keeps getting wealthier and wealthier, and Laban's thinking, okay, we're having children. They've got their own little compound. Jacob works for me. He's getting some wealth. I'm getting some wealth. Laban's thinking this could all work to my advantage. Everybody stays here. Everything becomes, I become even wealthier, because when you start to have that many grandchildren, especially in that culture, and they're all sons, and you start to increase your wealth, people will start listening to you. You end up with more power. And to somebody who loves power and control, more is always better. And that's the position that Laban took. More is better. And we're going to continue this incredible whirlwind of life that Jacob's living. We've just covered 14 years of life in one chapter. That's crazy. But we've got more time to go, and more insanity will ensue. Ladies and gentlemen, see you next week on The Epic Narrative.
Don't go anywhere. We've got Bob Thoughts.
Well, as you know, the fun never ends here in these amazing family stories in the Bible. I appreciate the fact that the drama of these renowned families, these fathers of the faith, these These honestly amazing men and women also had very imperfect family lives. They struggled to raise their children. They struggled not to play favorites. They struggled even in their walk with God. Sometimes they consulted him, sometimes they didn't. But God was always faithful. He was always good. He's always there. His goodness is just always there. It's like a never-ending flood. And I know we've touched on it before, and I'll say it again. His goodness showing up after a bad decision or a bad event or bad circumstances in no way indicates that he caused that decision to be made or he caused that circumstance for you to be in. It's just that he's good, and he's always good. And that's the amazing thing about God. That's it. It's like God is good all the time. All the time. God is good, right? Anyways, I know you all know that, but I just love those thoughts about him. The goodness of God in my thoughts is just constant. Somebody asked me once, why do you laugh all the time? And I said, well, the Holy Spirit's always talking to me, and he's always joyful, and he always has a good attitude, right? He always brings a perspective that encourages me. So it's easy to smile. And I do lose it. I do lose his voice sometimes, honestly, between you and me. If I think I'm running late at like time, that's just, I lose the joy. But I'm working on it. I once had a guy challenge, it was just a general challenge to an audience, but he goes, how expensive is the joy of the Lord? Like, how quickly do you disconnect from the atmosphere of heaven in a particular circumstance? And I thought, wow, that's a really good way of looking at it. Like, how cheap do I sell out the joy of the Lord? How easily do I just dismiss it and become angry and frustrated and all those negative emotions? Because so many times those negative emotions are really caused by a lack of perspective, a lack of trust in the goodness and faithfulness of God. And that's what I lean on. That's my journey. I constantly look for that paradigm. When I've lost the joy, when I've lost perspective, I say, all right, what am I missing? Why am I, where's my focus, and where should it be? It should be on the goodness of God, because he's always good. Oh, well, Bob, those are some interesting thoughts. Speaking of Bob, I noticed in this week's episode, several times I flipped names. I think I flipped, I flipped Jacob and Isaac, Jacob and Laban. I flipped them once. I flipped Leah and Rachel a couple times. So if you were paying attention, you probably were like, no, Bob. And I thought, where's my engineer? Where was my engineer during those times? And as you, just for what it's worth, once again, I make, that's me talking to myself, right? That's why I named the engineer Bob. He's not an actual voice in my head. He's not an actual person in the studio. It's just me talking to myself. And I created that title for him, for myself, just to kind of entertain me while I'm doing this, because I do this alone often. Well, the first couple seasons, almost completely in my basement. I did finish up season 2 recently, and that was while I was on the road here in the RV. But and I'm almost done writing season 3, so I'll start recording that soon. That's the book of Exodus. Oh man, have we got stuff to do. Anyways, back to Bob. I just want you to know, I in no way want it to be mocking of people who actually do have what I want to use the right term, mental illness. I know that's a serious thing, but I don't want to be offensive in this caricature of my inner voice saying, hey, you messed something up here, Bob. Because it is what happens internally. I'm like, wait a minute, something isn't flowing right, or or wow, you've been distracted for a while. Like, so I just created that person just to have fun by myself in the studio, that's funny, in my basement or my RV. And I just wanted you to know, if you know somebody, and I personally know them, I know several people and a couple relatives of mine who struggle with that kind of mental issue, internal issue, and I in no way want to be disrespectful or dishonoring to them. So just want to throw that out there as well. Those are some of my thoughts today. I hope you guys have a fabulous day, and I'll look forward again to being with you next week on the Epic Narrative.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to this podcast on any platform you use. You can also reach out to Bob for questions or booking at thebobswitzer.com or email him at thebobswitzer@gmail.com. See you next week, guys.